Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 28th of July, 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robertson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by Alex Thompson, speaking to us from dear old Blighty, as opposed to the Netherlands.
Well, we're going to get straight on with the latest technical briefing, number 19, released on the 23rd July. Now, of course, technical briefing number 17 got me into a bit of trouble because I made some comments about it, which were disagreed with by some. Those were clarified, but I actually then got told off subsequently for clarifying them because I was told I was right in the first place. So what is the facts behind this? What are we going to talk about here? Well, let's just have a quick look. This table 5, attendance to emergency care and deaths by vaccination status amongst all sequenced and genotyped Delta cases in England from the 1st of February to the 19th of July 2021. And of course, what we're talking about here is the government's numbers. We're not making any statement about whether these cases are genuine or not. We've made plenty of statements in the past about PCR and the reliability of PCR. So these numbers are what the government is talking about, and that's really what we're focusing on here. So whether any of these cases is a genuine case or not, well, that's a different matter. But if we look at the all cases line here, for people that have been vaccinated and unvaccinated, well, what do we get here? We get a vaccinated total of 82,864 cases and an unvaccinated total of 121,402 cases. Now, are those numbers accurate? Well, it depends on who you speak to, because although the numbers in the table, Public Health England claim are accurate, whether somebody is considered to be fully vaccinated or not, and whether it's appropriate to say that there's 82,000 people that are vaccinated in total or not, is what is really at the bottom of the debate about this table, because the mainstream press will say, well, the only people that are fully vaccinated are those that are double dosed, and there's only 28,773 of those. So if you take that number, then of course the unvaccinated total, if you consider that people that are only partially vaccinated are effectively unvaccinated, because it doesn't really work unless you've had 2 doses, then the numbers seem somewhat different. So we can have a discussion about the accuracy or not of that, but this is what I'm saying: a vaccinated total of 82,864 and an unvaccinated total of 121,402. And Brian, the first thing to say there is these are not orders of magnitude different. So that's the first point to make. So let's move on with this. And what's it talking about next? It's talking about deaths within 28 days of the positive specimen date. And again, we might say that the vaccinated deaths are 289 in total, as against 165 amongst unvaccinated deaths. And of course, it was this statistic that got me into trouble the last time, because I was told that, in fact, the main levels of deaths are in the over 50s. And of course, you're going to get people over 50 dying. And so therefore, it didn't really count. Well, apparently other people are really finding this difficult, this statistic to get around, because we're starting to see headlines like this, which tries to justify it. So this is from Medical Press. And the headline is, most COVID deaths in England now are in the vaccinated. Here's why that shouldn't alarm you. And so they talk about a simple thought experiment. Imagine everyone is now fully vaccinated with COVID vaccines, which are excellent, but can't save all lives. We'll come on to that in a little bit. Some people who get infected with COVID will still die. All of these people will be fully vaccinated, 100%. That doesn't mean that vaccines aren't effective at reducing death. The risk of dying from COVID, they say, doubles roughly every 7 years older a patient is. The 35-year difference between 35-year-olds and 70-year-olds means the risk of death between the 2 patients has doubled 5 times. Equivalently, it has increased by a factor of 32. An unvaccinated 70-year-old might be 32 times more likely to die of COVID than an unvaccinated 35-year-old. This dramatic variation of the risk profile with age means that even excellent vaccines don't reduce the risk of death for older people to below the risk for some younger demographics. Okay, that's their claim. That's what they're saying. So they also say, however, in this report, Public Health England data suggests that being double vaccinated reduced the risk of being hospitalized with the now dominant Delta variant by around 96%. So let's just have a look at that statistic, and does that stack up? Well, coming back to the technical briefing 19 and looking at attendance to emergency care and deaths by vaccination amongst, this is what the table is about, same table. And what we're looking at here is cases where presentation to emergency care resulted in an overnight inpatient admission. It seems to me that if somebody goes to emergency care and they're released on the same day, that doesn't really count. We've got the stress on the NHS is in beds. So if people aren't occupying a bed, then we shouldn't be worrying about it too much. But anyway, so let's play the game and only count the double vaccinated hospitalizations, and in which case they're saying 474 people are vaccinated, are hospitalized, and in unvaccinated 1,742. But this is between the 1st of February 2021 and the 19th of July 2021. So I'm not certain that that's putting any particular pressure on the NHS. And particularly when you look at the relative to the number of cases, it's not, the number of cases is not resulting in hospitalizations, not even amongst the unvaccinated. So where's the effect of the vaccine? It's not clear, but we'll come on to this a bit more in a second. Now, if we go back to deaths then, and we look at double vaccinated deaths, 224, unvaccinated deaths, 165. It's still, if you only include the double vaccinated, it's still bigger. But here's the problem with it. If we, well, we have to use the Israeli data for this, really, to do this calculation. But if we take Pfizer as an example, Pfizer claims to have a 95% efficacy. So that's our baseline here. In Israel, in the latest data, the fully vaccinated population of Israel is 59%. That means 41% is everyone else, okay? And if we therefore work out, based on the 95% efficacy, we're expect, so 95% of the 59% of the fully vaccinated population comes to 56.05% of the fully vaccinated population would be protected if we believe what the government says, and 2.95% of the fully vaccinated population would be unprotected on the basis that the vaccine only has 95% efficacy. Remember, we're talking about what they're saying. This is not what I'm saying. So the hospitalizations and deaths that you would expect would come from that 2.95%. So we'll just work out a quick ratio here, which is 2.95 over 41. So we're going to call that the expected ratio. This is what we would expect to see. But and that would mean that as a percentage of the vaccinated, we would expect to see 77.2% fully vaccinated having problems, dying, and 92.8% of the people that are going to hospital that are dying. We'd expect to see that as this would be the expected proportion between vaccinated and unvaccinated. But in fact, based on the Israeli data, what we're seeing is 63% vaccinated and 37% unvaccinated dying. And so that actually, although we don't have the numbers in the UK data to do the calculation, this, when we look at the baseline figure, which is this, is quite similar. So what effect is the vaccine actually having at this point? If we're expecting to see a 7% of the deaths being in the vaccinated and the rest being in the unvaccinated, but in fact, we're seeing 60% of the deaths in the vaccinated and 40% of the deaths in unvaccinated people. And we're seeing similar kinds of statistics in the UK, although it's not quite the same, but it's very close.
We could come up with two answers, Mike, couldn't we? We could come up and say that there's a serious problem here, or we could be saying that the fact the public isn't given accurate statistics and accurate analysis by the government into what's happening as a result of the vaccine program says that they don't want to get into this level of detail. So you're asking the questions that the government should be asking. Why isn't the government asking those questions? Because they are frightened of the answers, I'm going to suggest.
Well, indeed. And of course, we had the incident last week of Patrick Vallance getting the 60-40 proportions reversed and then he had to issue a retraction the following day on Twitter. So there seems to be this obfuscation, or I mean, it's a clear obfuscation because there's no way to compare like with like between various data sets. The data sets are incomplete. I mean, if we put that back on screen for a second, the point that was made to me when I was criticized for sort of partially retracting what I'd said with Technical Briefing 17 was that this whole basis of under 50s and over 50s, this separation between these two cohorts in these statistics is completely arbitrary. It's been completely made up. There's no medical reason, there's no immunological reason, there's no historical basis for this under 50s and over 50s division between statistics. And the argument that was made to me was that division has been deliberately chosen in order to skew the figures and make the picture look in a particular way. So, this issue of the quality of the data, the availability of the data, the ability to compare data for various data sets, the fact that hospital bed occupancy, ICU and hospital bed availability over the last 40 years, we can't see any trends because this data isn't easily available. And even when it is available, they've changed the way that they've gathered the data, they changed the way they present the data. There's no way to actually get a proper picture on it.
Certainly for the ordinary person who's still occupied with everyday life and going to work, they need some help in looking at this data. And let's remind our audience that the MHRA, which says it's there to protect the health and safety of the UK population, has still not released any coherent and analytical data on its own yellow card vaccine adverse effect statistics. So the organization that is the lead for protecting the public from dangerous medicines and vaccines has still not produced a single document showing its analysis into the safety of vaccines. Perhaps this is time, Mike, to introduce this gentleman. Now, UK Column has said that we're absolutely delighted that we've got some top world experts coming to us in order to comment on what they think is happening. And a few days ago, we were able to speak to this gentleman, Christian Perron, who's former chairman of the Specialised Committee on Communicable Diseases, and that's the High Council of Public Health in France. And he was a former member of the European group advising the World Health Organization. Now, this gentleman has spoken out, and of course, as a result of speaking out on the subject of vaccines, he's suddenly been removed from these very high-profile positions. But we're going to say the full interview on this will be available shortly. We've still got a little bit more editing to do before it's ready. But Mike, you've just done your detailed analysis into the British government's own data, but we've now got world-class experts coming and also challenging what's happening. Let's have a look at a little excerpt from that interview. Okay, and can we just press a little bit further? If they're not vaccines, what would you call them?
It may be genetic modifiers. I don't know exactly the good term on the scientific point of view, but when you inject messenger RNA to produce a huge amount of spike proteins, a fragment of the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 virus, you don't control the process. And the problem is that in human cells, we know that RNA may go back to DNA. Normally, it's from DNA to RNA. It's a little bit, maybe a little bit difficult to understand for a general audience, but it may go in the reverse way because we have in our chromosomes, in our genome, genes in our DNA coming from retroviruses for millenniums or centuries. They're animal origin, and they can code for enzymes which can code in the reverse side. So we know now, it's officially published, that now we find in the human genome sequences of DNA corresponding to the RNA of the virus. So it's a proof that what I said in December in a public letter saying that it was dangerous to inject these products, now it's confirmed. But all the governments continue. For me, it's a great mistake.
So, is there a pandemic? Was there ever a pandemic? But as well as that, um, should the unvaccinated be afraid of the current variants that are out there and the coming variants?
Exactly the reverse. Vaccinated people are at risk for the new variants and transmit it. It's proven now in different countries. So vaccinated people should be put in quarantine and should be isolated from the society. And unvaccinated people are not dangerous. Vaccinated people are dangerous for others. It's proven in Israel now, as I'm in contact with many physicians in Israel. They have a big problems. Now, severe cases in hospitals are among vaccinated people. And in UK also, you had a large vaccination program, and also there are problems. But the Delta variant is not very it's not very dangerous. It's all the variants since last year are less and less virulent. It's always a story of infectious diseases.
So, a very interesting and powerful interview with Professor Perron. And let's remember that he was originally in charge, if you like, of the French vaccine system. He was involved in the policy. And as he said at the beginning of our interview, he believes in vaccines. But in the case of the vaccines that are being presented to the population in France and UK and worldwide at the moment, he is saying these are dangerous. So we've got a professional who has now looked at the evidence of what is being presented to the public, and he's warning of the dangers. So I don't know whether Alex would like to comment at all.
Yes, I believe that I'm speaking here from, and I believe that the sound is good, though the video quality is not excellent. But as you announced, Brian, we are going to go to town on this whole series with French experts. So one of the things I'm doing is ensure that a transcript is available for the website by the time the video is released, because he does have sometimes some quite strong French idioms and pronunciation, and we've had feedback already that people would like subtitles. Well, transcript is more accurate and less effort, actually, so we'll do that rather than subtitles. But in a bit that I've just transcribed this morning, Professor Christian Perron goes on to say, we should by now have reliable serological tests. This is where you draw a blood sample and look for bodies that your body has produced against a virus if you had the disease recently. The problem is, says Professor Perron, that no lab in the world has developed a reliable serological test. That's terrible. I think that the scientific community, owing to some conflicts of interest, did not want reliable serological tests, because if we had done that, we would be able to see today that most of the British, German, Spanish population are now immune. But it showed that, he says, it would be a big one for the marketing by the pharmacological companies, because they would then not be able to impose the vaccination policy, because I think that most people in Europe and other countries worldwide are already recognized there is herd immunity. To me, this is a scandal, sabotage. So speaks the man who wrote the French vaccination policy.
Yes, I'm afraid, Alex, your audio is dropping out quite a bit, so I don't know whether you might like to try to reconnect and see if we can do a little bit better with that. But thanks for those comments.
Yeah, and we will say full interview with Christian Perron will be available in the next few days, and it contains a lot of really startling information, and there are more of the experts to follow. Well, why should the UK government and other governments be getting panicky about young people? This headline from Sky probably says it all. COVID-19 younger age groups will take longer to vaccinate than older as enthusiasm wanes. And it goes on to say there's been a reduction in the numbers of younger people taking up their invitation to get vaccinated, as that age group sees the highest number of COVID-19 cases. So a typical headline, because it's got the fear factor in there that apparently because there's more cases, younger people should be afraid and therefore go and be vaccinated, whereas the indications are that, of course, the virus is not dangerous for those young people. But Sky, following the policy, And then they've reinforced it with quotes from this gentleman, Raqib Ali, the honorary consultant, Oxford University Hospitals NHS Trust. Without any data, any graphs, any statistics, any information of any sort, he simply gives his opinion to provide the meat of Sky's reporting. So this is what he says. As a lot of this age group are getting infected, some think they are immune anyway, so they don't need the vaccine. The risks are lower for younger people if they get COVID-19, so some don't think they need the vaccine, but they still do. No data to support that claim, Mike, whatsoever. Some have also developed COVID in the interim after the first dose, so they've had to delay getting their second, which could be affecting numbers. I particularly like that one. So you get vaccinated, which is going to protect you, but it doesn't, well, you need 2 doses, and then is there evidence that it protects you fully? No, there isn't. So the spin continues. There's no doubt we're struggling to get higher uptake in lower age groups than we'd like. Who is we, I wondered when I read this statement, because does he regard himself as simply being part of the British government team? Is he part of the SAGE team? Is he part of Boris Johnson's cabinet team? Who is the we? Well, of course, we're not told. It's a bit of inertia as well as natural infection affecting the numbers, but we'd expect that to improve in the coming weeks if cases continue to fall. So cases are falling. The COVID is not dangerous for younger people, but despite that, we've got to keep pushing for vaccinations. Now is also a really good time to be able to get both doses before starting university in September. You don't want to be self-isolating when you get there. Now, I'm going to comment on this because what Raqib Ali is doing is ending with the applied psychology of fear and a threat. I.e., if you don't do what we suggest you're going to do, if you don't do what we're telling you, then you could be in a very nasty position, self-isolating at university. And of course, we know there's a huge increase in mental health problems amongst young students as a result of the government's lockdown policies to date. So a Sky News article with no data, document, statistics, or evidence of any kind to back up the claim in the headline.
Well, the Telegraph day or two ago claiming an exclusive that over half of COVID hospitalizations tested positive after admission. And what they're saying is leaked data suggests vast numbers classed as being hospitalized by the virus when they were admitted, when in fact they were admitted with other ailments. More than half of the COVID hospitalizations are patients who only tested positive after admission, according to leaked data. The figures suggest vast numbers are being classed as hospitalized by COVID when they're admitted with other ailments, with the virus picked up by routine testing. So in other words, they're exhibiting no symptoms. They went in for another issue. They were then tested and they tested positive. Experts said it meant the national statistics published daily on the government website and frequently referred to by ministers may far overstate the levels of pressures on the NHS. The leaked data covering all NHS trusts in England show that as of last Thursday, just 44% of the patients classed, 44% involved people who tested positive in the 14 days before hospital entry. A further 43% were made within 2 days of admission, with 13% made in the days and weeks that followed, including those likely to have caught the virus in hospital. So they do quote Carl Hennigan from the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, and he said the data is incredibly important and it should be published on an ongoing basis. When people hear about hospitalizations with COVID, they will assume that COVID is the likely cause, but this data shows something quite different. This is about COVID being detected after tests were looking for it. And they also quote Graham Brady, who's the chairman of the 1922 committee, saying that nearly 18 months into the COVID crisis, it's absurd that data is breaking down hospital admissions still isn't publicly available on a regular basis. Counting all patients who test positive as COVID hospitalizations is inevitably misleading and gives a false picture of the continuing health impact of the virus. Greg Clark, who's chairman of the Common Science and Technology Select Committee, chimed in as well. He said if hospitalizations from COVID are a key determinant of how concerned we should be and how quickly restrictions should be lifted. It's important that data is not presented in a way that could lead to the wrong conclusions being drawn. While some of these people may be being admitted due to COVID, we currently do not know how many. And for those who are not, there's a big distinction between people who are admitted because of COVID and those who are in for something else, but have COVID in a much more mild form, or it's not the cause of their hospitalization. And I'm going to say, well, I'm glad some people are starting to catch up on this, because this is a point that we've been trying to make for about a year now, I think. So what is this article? Is this an attempt to sort of walk back from the previous position in the mainstream press? Or is this finally an admission by the mainstream press that they've been wrong from the beginning on this?
I think it's the truth, Mike, starting to spread through the system. They've pumped out all of the misleading information, and the mainstream media, I'm talking about the press, have pushed out all the government policy. A lot of that has been untrue. It's been misleading. It's been propaganda. Now what we've got is truth, which is very powerful, starting to seep back through the system. So this is to anybody who's speaking out and they're looking at in the right direction and presenting the right data needs to be supported.
So let's have a look at this then, because maybe it gives some more indication of misleading information we've had over the last 12 or 14 months. This actually was published in December. It's a paper from Italy. It's entitled "Unexpected Detection of SARS-CoV-2 Antibodies in the pre-pandemic period in Italy." And so this was from Italy's Istituto Nazionale dei Tumori. It's a cancer institute, and they collected blood samples with respect to cancer patients in September and October 2019, which seemed to indicate that coronavirus antibodies were already present at that point. They were these cancer study samples were retrospectively tested. And the results showed that 11.6% of 959 healthy volunteers had antibodies in their blood already in September, October, which means they had to have been infected prior to that. And so the suggestion is that these were people that were all male smokers, that were all 55 to 65 years old. And it's not clear why they should have had these antibodies, as you can see from the title of this. But we'll just say that, of course, we've had other scientific research. Oh, sorry, just before we get to that, we'll mention this article, COVID-19 Italian study revives debate over when pandemic started in Europe. This is from the local.it. This, because up to date, this December research has now been confirmed by the World Health Organization. The quote in this article is that the results of this retesting suggest that what we previously reported, that asymptomatic patients is a plausible signal of early circulation of the virus in Italy. Well, they keep banging on this asymptomatic narrative. That's not quite accurate, but anyway, because they've no clear knowledge of whether these people were symptomatic because they weren't looking for symptoms of this at the time. If this is confirmed, this would explain the explosion of cases observed in Italy. SARS-CoV-2, or an earlier version, circulated silently beneath the surface. Well, could that be because the vast majority of symptoms that people see are similar, if not identical, to the symptoms of other respiratory viruses? So it was only once there was a claim of a novel virus that we started heading into what was being described as a pandemic. So this thing clearly seemed to be doing the rounds prior to that, and we have evidence from other countries as well, of course. Let's just remind ourselves that Barcelona had been testing wastewater. This is something the British government is doing now, finding the virus in sewage water. But this was from March 2019. They claimed to find it. Now, this particular report was subsequently rubbished by the various fact checkers, but it's not clear exactly whether the fact checkers were even close to being right. In fact, we can say that they weren't. But anyway, another case here from Brazil, coronavirus in sewage sample in November 2019. So there's lots more and more scientific evidence being developed that antibodies and also viral material in sewage doing the rounds in 2019, long before this thing was claimed to have become a novel virus.
Yeah, and I'll just make the point again that everywhere that there's been flooding, whether it's in UK or Europe overseas, inevitably in the flood water is a large proportion of sewage, and nobody in officialdom is commenting, of course, on the risks of sewage contamination in those flood waters, with the risk of COVID in the background, and certainly South West Water doesn't want to talk about that. Well, let's change the angle a little bit and come in with our old friend Susan Michie. Now, this is a report from the Daily Mail a little while ago, back in June, and the headline was "Social Distancing and Face Masks Should Stay Forever," says Communist SAGE Committee member Professor Susan Michie. Now, she was taken to task on one of the mainstream media interviews over the fact she was a communist. She got very shirty about that and said it was irrelevant to the fact she was a scientist presenting scientific information. But the key bit of this was that she clearly felt that the restrictions that people were facing at the moment was something that was just going to last into the foreseeable future. And that comment was enough to make a young lady, I think it was a Sky journalist, nearly fall off her chair while she was doing the interview. So we've been having a look at what's been going on, not only with SAGE, but with the SPI B committee. And one of our sharp-eyed viewers came across this document from Implementation Science. And we're straight into the realms of applied behavioral psychology, behavioral influencing behavior in order to get political policies in place. And this has come up with a wheel. Now, I'm sure many people have seen these little cardboard wheels that you have for various things. Maybe it's how you cook an egg properly, or how you organize your day, but you've got a series of discs which can be spun and positioned against each other in order to produce certain results. But this is the level of research that we're now seeing is being used to influence the population of UK in order to get us to adhere to government policies. And of course, the main target area is that we should adhere to all of the policies with regard to face mask, lockdown, restrictions into venues, and of course, vaccines. So why are we interested in this? Well, this is part of the document itself, the Behaviour Change Wheel, a new method for characterising and designing behaviour change interventions. And our viewer spotted that Susan Michie was the lead name amongst the authors. And we just found it very interesting that we've got this lady as a communist now working to help the government change the behaviour of the population so that we adhere to their policies without necessarily questioning. So if we just look at a bit of detail, the background of what was going on here was the design and implementation of evidence-based practice, and that depended on successful behaviour change interventions. This required an appropriate method for characterising interventions and linking them to, quote, analysis of the targeted behaviour. There exists a plethora of frameworks of behaviour change interventions, but it's not clear how well they serve this purpose. So they're gloating here, Mike, at the armoury they've got in order to use applied psychology, but they're not very clear apparently about how it works. So let's have a look. Methods: a systematic search of electronic databases and consultation with behaviour change expert was used to identify frameworks of behaviour change interventions. I wonder what electronic databases she's referring to there. Could this be to do with the NHS or social services? We don't know. These were valued according to three criteria: comprehensiveness, coherence, and a clear link to overarching model of behaviour. The reliability with which it could be applied was examined in two domains of behaviour change: tobacco control and obesity. Now, I'm going to say to our audience, don't be fooled by the fact that tobacco and obesity are mentioned here, because as we dig into this material, we are seeing more and more that there's always a soft line. Don't worry, we're only looking at tobacco and obesity, when in fact we can see deeper and deeper and deeper levels that they're targeting with behavioural change. So we'll follow through. These are the results. 19 frameworks were identified covering 9 intervention functions and 7 policy categories that could enable these interventions. None of the frameworks reviewed covered the full range of intervention functions or policies. Only a minority met the criteria of coherence or linkage to a model of behaviour. At the centre of a proposed new framework is a behaviour system involving 3 essential conditions: capability, opportunity, and motivation. This forms the hub of the behaviour change wheel. So all of these scientists working in the background to change our behaviour. And what do they produce out of their time? They produce a little cardboard wheel. This is not silly, though, because what they're doing is very serious. This is the conclusions. Interventions and policies to change behaviour can be usefully characterised by means of a BCW, that's the wheel, comprising, quote, a behaviour system at the hub, encircled by intervention functions, and then by policy categories. Research is needed. That means more money to pay us is needed to establish how far the BCW can lead to more efficient design of effective interventions. And if you think this is all stuff and nonsense, let's remind ourselves that back in 2010, the British Cabinet Office boasted in its Mindspace document that it could use applied behavioural psychology to change the way people thought and behaved. And it gloated that they wouldn't know their behaviour had changed, or if they did, how it had been changed. And Alex, if you can still hear us okay, I'd just like to ask for your opinion. We are seeing that this applied behavioural change agenda is everywhere within the British government. Nobody is immune from it, including the politicians themselves. So the people controlling this policy must be the people who now hold power and can influence, can wield that power within the British government.
Well, yes, of course, because the means of logically profiling and priming people, then you even get to select those who think that they got into the civil service or into academia through their own excellence and aptitude. It may be that they were already pre-funneled to be not only good at their job, but of a particular personality type. And if you read mid-century material from the 30s and 40s, 3 books written by William Sargant, Sargant, with no E in the surname. The Mind is the best known, but there were 2 follow-ups that can be found as PDFs on the internet. You will see that the National Health Service and the government, the service at the time in the 50s and 60s, was inordinately interested. And without going too deep for lunchtime news, I would just say that particular arcane societies were already talking in the first half of the 20th century, if not before that, about selecting the kinds of people that were necessary to fill the roles of administration. So yes, if you have this insight, you can run with it. It's very reminiscent of Scottish government's well-being agenda as part of the failed but still continued named person policy, because what were social workers given there to play with? A well-being wheel, since exported to the Netherlands.
And Alex, we'll just add to that. Of course, it was the UK column back in 2011 that highlighted that Sarkozy's neurological and psychology expert, Olivier Willier, was working with the Cabinet Office in UK. This was all facilitated by the Franco-British Council. And this was to build a joint Franco-British system of applied behavioural psychology to get policy in. So that was done in partnership with the French. And I have to say that the French experts who are now speaking to the UK column about their concerns about lockdown and the vaccine policy have actually been astonished to discover this applied behavioural psychology at work in France.
Okay, let's move on to international matters. And well, another week and another couple of NATO exercises going on. This is exercise Thracian Star, and so that was taking place in Bulgaria. It ended a couple of days ago. Well, this, of course, putting more pressure on Russia, but it doesn't end there because there's a new one coming. Agile Spirit starts in a few days' time. July the 26th. In fact, it's already started. And that's in Georgia, 700 military personnel, US military personnel, and 1,600 Georgian troops, 250 troops from other nations. And the brigade level exercise will incorporate a simulated command post exercise, field training, and joint multinational battalion level combined arms live fire exercises. Agile Spirit 2021 enhances US, Georgian, allied, and regional partner forces readiness and interoperability in a realistic training environment. 14 nations taking part, as well as the US and Georgia. That's Estonia, Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Spain, Turkey, Ukraine, UK, Canada, Italy, and Azerbaijan. Rick Rozoff, Alex from antiwar.com was making the point that, of course, a previous NATO exercise of a similar sort of scale was followed on very quickly with the Georgian attack on South Ossetia. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
It's actually the culmination of a 20-year cycle of US-led, but now it's also including Eastern European NATO members, training and equipping of Georgian and indeed Ukrainian troops. These countries both have problems with separatist and unacknowledged territories, which have declared themselves republics separate from Ukraine and Georgia. And in fact, because of that, plus an alleged Chechen terrorist problem of very murky detail, they started in 2002 a series of train and equip programs for Georgia. If you could follow the press in Washington, they are wringing their hands because with the NATO presence in Afghanistan, in which Georgia has always supplied men and in fact lost some in Afghanistan, and Georgia is losing one of the key ways that it can demonstrate that it is a loyal servant of the NATO agenda. And at least on paper, the US Marines are no longer going to be doing scheduled in-country training of Georgian troops. So in a sense, this is actually Georgia about to be left on its own. There are some overtones, Mike, of the situation leading up to the August 2000 hot war in South Ossetia. One of the famous unresolved questions there is, did Condoleezza Rice, then the US Secretary, the American equivalent foreign minister, stoke up the Georgians, stoke Mikhail Saakashvili, the then president, to attack on the force that the US and NATO would be right behind them facing the Russian 58th Army? If so, that is another overtone of what may follow.
Yes. Okay, thank you for that, Alex. And well, I don't know, when was the last time there was a terrorist incident on a ferry, Brian? In the UK, I mean, a UK-based ferry.
I honestly can't remember. I know that fairly recently they were doing exercises on ferries, but when there was an actual incident.
Well, not only have they been doing exercises on ferries in the past, but we've now just set up a new treaty between ourselves and the French to deal with security on cross-channel ferries. So this is Dominic Raab. He and Priti Patel have agreed a new maritime security treaty between the UK and France. This strengthens UK security by fully equipping law enforcement and emergency responders to respond to terrorist incidents, no matter where they occur, but especially on ferries. UK emergency responders will have more power to deal with terrorist incidents in the Channel thanks to a new treaty. This is called the UK-France Maritime Security Treaty. So let's see what he had to say. As close allies, it's vital for the UK and France to work together to protect our citizens and values. Today's signing of the UK-France Maritime Security Treaty will reinforce our ability to jointly respond swiftly and effectively to terrorist threats in the Channel. So there we go. We've all got to be worried about traveling to France on the boat.
It's fascinating, isn't it? At the moment, we can't control borders in that we've got people crossing the Channel and simply arriving in UK. The government can't get to grips with that. People coming into UK in small rubber boats or part of the way in boats and swimming ashore. But we can go onto the ferries to make sure those nasty terrorists aren't going to be on the holiday ferries.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Okay, well, if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. And there are options to help us out there. That would be very much appreciated. But also do share our material on the platforms that we're still on. Twitter and Facebook still on there for the moment, but certainly on brand YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey as well.
Yes, and
yes, another quick advertisement for the Doctors for COVID Ethics Symposium, which is being hosted by the UK Column. It's taking place tomorrow and Friday, from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. You can watch it on ukcolumn.org/live. UK Column members, of course, can also watch it on the members live page and take part in the chat box as well. And I'm sure somebody will be watching that. But do come along and watch that if you possibly can. Some fantastic people taking part in that. Of course, Sucharit Bhakdi, Professor Michael Palmer, Wolfgang Wodarg, Catherine Austin-Fitz, Mike Yeadon, and a whole host of others taking part in that. It's going to be a spectacular event. But one thing we are going to say is we've decided that we won't do a news program on Friday in order to make room for this, but it's going to be 10 hours of fantastic content.
And I think we can say again that we are extremely pleased that we've got another section of professional people with the confidence to come to the UK Column in order to help get their message out. So we're going to say back to those doctors and experts, thank you very much for coming to the UK Column. We appreciate it, and well, really it's what we're here for, which is to get the information out that other news sources won't. Now, many people often say to us, how do we do things? If we're challenging the system, how do we actually do it? I was sent this little video clip, let's just have a look at the still, by a number of people, and it's very simple. It's a lady who's at a cafe or something, but she's having a conversation with an NHS vaccine team, and in the conversation, she quietly tells the NHS team what they don't know. So have a listen to this clip. You will have to pay attention to what the NHS lady says. The video, the audio is down a little bit, although we have tried to edit that. But this is a very, very important little clip. Let's watch and listen, and then we can discuss it a little bit.
Okay, so sorry, I just jumped in there. Sorry, I was a bit presumptuous. Let's start again.
No, don't worry, no. Okay, right. Hello, I'm Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Mrs. Casal, hi. I was just calling to discuss your COVID vaccination plans and to get some feedback as to where you are with your decision making and if there's a specific reason that you haven't gone ahead with your vaccine yet.
Absolutely. Looking at the yellow card system, which you're saying that you're unfamiliar with, which I think actually, do you work for the NHS?
I do, yes.
Yeah, so the fact that you're actually ringing me to discuss a vaccine, but you're not aware of the system, the government system that I can then go into if I had an adverse reaction, I think is quite unbelievable, to be honest. The reason why I'm declining the vaccine is because it's not a vaccine, it's still in the experimental stages, and there have been thousands upon thousands upon thousands of adverse reactions.
Completely understandable.
Yeah, and I really suggest as an NHS worker that before you ring anybody else to discuss why they're not actually having the vaccine or where they are, that you actually find out about the yellow card system and have a look at how many people have died and how many people have had horrendous adverse effects.
Honestly, I'm going to be raising this with my boss the minute I put the phone down from you, because, yeah, like you say, if it's important, I need to know about it.
It's extremely important.
I couldn't agree with you more.
It's on the government website.
It's on the government website, so
and only 1% get reported.
It's not hidden, and it's known. The MHRI, is it?
MHRA.
They say that only about 10% of people actually report any adverse reactions.
1%, isn't it, with that Ruby?
So when you look at the figures and think that that's only 10% of people actually logging their adverse reactions, it's quite scary. So I'm scared to take the vaccine. It's not a vaccine, it's a government trial, and I really don't want to be part of any trial. There is a treatment called ivermectin. There is a British scientist called Tess Lawrie that is fighting tooth and nail to get ivermectin licensed in the UK, but unfortunately she's been censored every which way possible because there's no financial gain for anybody. So I think it would be brilliant, Carol, if you, one, had a look at the yellow card system on the government website, and two, have a look at Tess Lawrie's website and research ivermectin, because it is a much safer option, and it would be lovely if the NHS started ringing people up and informing them about the other options that are out there rather than just the vaccine.
Sure. Sorry, ivermectin, how are you spelling that, please?
IVERMECTIN.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. No, I've certainly taken on board what
Brilliant,
you said.
brilliant.
And, you know, I want to learn just as much as anybody.
Excellent.
Perfect.
You know, I'm sorry that I didn't know anything about it, but trust me, by the end of my shift today, I will.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That has made me feel, yeah.
Honestly, if I can give you any reassurance, it's this, you know, that I will be looking into this straight away, because, you know, for you to feel so strongly about it, it's really important to me.
And I'm a school teacher, so I feel even more strongly that this is soon going to be rolled out on children. Adults can make their own informed choice, but the fact that it's going to start being put into children, for me, is very scary. Is there any way, Carol, that you've got my number, that you could have a look at what I've said?
So what a wonderful clip. What was so powerful about that, of course, is the lady, the school teacher, is so measured, she's so calm, she knows her facts, she's challenging the lady in the vaccination booking centre in a very measured, polite, reasonable way. And the result is that that lady is paying attention to what she's saying, to the extent she says, I will go and investigate this. She also talks about, at one stage, says about talking to her supervisor. So the key to this is factual information, accurate, truthful information, and how you deal with the person in order to try and convince them to look down a different route. So I thought as a little snapshot of how to do things properly, this lady needs a medal, really.
Ivermectin, of course, the government has begun its clinical trial of ivermectin, and well, we need to be watching that very carefully, because we saw the way they ran the recovery trial for hydroxychloroquine, and they effectively overdosed people based on certainly the European levels of what are considered to be the maximum doses that are allowed. So that is a scandal. There's an article, a fantastic article by Ian Davis on that on the UK Column website, if you haven't seen that. And of course, the other thing there is that, well, the JCVI have said that, well, they're going to be targeting younger people that are have various learning disabilities and so on at this point. The decision to roll that out more broadly amongst school children looks like it's not going to be made for a little bit longer, but nonetheless, certainly some children are already being categorized as those who would want the vaccine.
Yeah.
Now, another quick advertisement. If you haven't got your Loving the Old Normal t-shirt yet, Patrick still has some of these in stock. They're going very, very fast. There aren't very many left. Do get your Loving the Old Normal t-shirt if you would like one. We are all essential, it says on the back. Well, there were plenty of them at the demonstration at the weekend, and well, there's a few more to get if you would like one.
Yeah, excellent. Well, serious topic, which several people have flagged up, and that is The Guardian and others are reporting this particular article, hundreds of children abused whilst in the care of Lambeth Council, inquiry finds. And it's saying that the abuse occurred over several decades on a scale that was hard to comprehend. Well, presumably it was hard to comprehend for The Guardian, but it certainly wouldn't be for the survivors themselves, or indeed the UK Column, because we have warned and warned about the scale of the abuse of children in UK, and it's clear that this is well known at government level, but either a blind eye is turned to the problem, or else we can, I think, indicate with some confidence that the government itself is involved in helping to facilitate the abuse of the children. Well, in the article, this lady is quoted, Councillor Claire Holland, and I'm just going to say this extraordinary graphic is not something created by the UK Column. This has come off Lambeth Council's own web page. So here is Councillor Claire Holland, leader of the council. Quite an extraordinary inset picture. I'm not sure the significance of the red, but let's bring her on screen. She said that Lambeth Council wishes to restate our sincere and heartfelt apology to all victims and survivors of abuse and neglect while in Lambeth's care. The council was responsible for their care and protection, but failed with profound consequences. The council is deeply sorry for their experiences. Now, of course, the key thing in this statement is that the council is nobody. To say that the council was at fault doesn't take us anywhere. The truth of the matter is that individuals, people, human beings were at fault, but none of those are mentioned, and so they can all disappear into the long grass and life can continue as normal. So if we move across to Professor Alexis Jay, who was leading the ICSA inquiry, she said the children in care were pawns in a toxic power game within the council in the 1980s and 90s, which was characterized over many years by bullying, racism, nepotism, and sexism against a backdrop of political chaos, corruption, and financial mismanagement. Was there anything that wasn't listed in there, Mike? I don't know. But she went on, this all contributed to allowing children in their care to suffer the most horrendous sexual abuse, with just one senior council employee disciplined for their part in it. We hope this report and our recommendations will ensure abuse on this scale never happens again. Well, of course, the beauty of Alexis Jay's inquiry is that it also very rarely, almost never, is pointing a finger at individuals and individuals. It simply points the finger back at bodies like Lambeth Council, who apologise as a body, and life continues as normal.
Yes, is there any sign of prosecutions?
Well, they've pointed the police at a case dating back to the 1970s, so presumably that will provide a little bit of distraction. But we'd just like to remind the public, I've put some words on the screen. Of course, Alexis Jay didn't say this, but I'll explain why I am saying it. Of course, we would not want the primary whistleblowers and survivors being given full access to this independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. It is a fact that Alexis Jay's inquiry refused to give key whistleblowers and abuse survivors the opportunity to give their evidence in person at her inquiry, and key witnesses from within the police, for example, were also denied the opportunity to put their full evidence on the table. So we will suggest that the Alexis Jay inquiry has been assembled in order to make sure that the system around children goes undisturbed, but maybe that's just an opinion.
Okay, let's move on to some Green New Deal stuff now. Over the last couple of months, we have on a number of occasions highlighted the fact that, well, if the government is to pursue its policy of replacing internal combustion engine vehicles with electric vehicles, that there is not sufficient cobalt and lithium on the planet and other rare earths on the planet to actually produce the batteries required in order to do that if we stick with lithium ion as the main technology involved. On top of that, we've made the point that the electrical grid, the electrical infrastructure in the country isn't capable of charging the car fleet should we replace internal combustion engine vehicles with electric vehicles. Well, the Mail has a headline this morning, Britain faces blackouts due to electric car revolution, fears national grid won't cope if drivers charge their vehicles at on-peak times during the day. So they are saying that they quote Tory MP Hugh Merriman, who's chair of the Commons Transport Select Committee, who's saying that owners should be incentivized to recharge batteries little but often to avoid shortages. Electric cars, they say, have been forecast to create an extra 18 gigawatts demand for power in the UK at peak times by 2050, according to the National Grid. That is the equivalent of 6 Hinkley Point nuclear power stations. However, this was the bit that cracked me up. The actual increase in supply required is likely to be less due to improvements in charging technologies, and the 18 gigawatt figure is cited as the most extreme scenario. The National Grid has insisted it will be able to cope with any increase without blackouts. Well, the fact of the matter is that the UK's electricity generating capacity has been falling for years, and there's no sign of that process being reversed. So, but this is new news because back in December, I think this was 2020, this is Energy Live News. National Grid boss warns Britain risks power blackouts because of network decay. So they're saying that this is mainly because what they describe as reliable coal and nuclear plants are being closed at a time when electricity use is expected to increase with COVID-19 rules relaxed. That was over the winter that's just gone by. This was reported in what The Guardian writes was a surprise report that warned that the margin of forecast electricity supplies might exceed demand by 5.3%, the tightest margin recorded since the winter of 2015-2016. Following tighter margins, the report said, in winter 2020-2021, compared to previous winters, we've decided to publish an early review of the margin for winter 2021-2022. We believe this will help inform the electricity industry and support preparations for the winter ahead. So lots of people talking about this for various reasons, not just the extra demand of electric cars. Of course, the more electric cars go on the roads, the more demand there is. But also because we are not replacing like for like the power stations that are being shut down, and generating capacity is falling, and we're replacing generating capacity that is capable of producing electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with generating capacity which is intermittent. So at certain times, whenever there's a reduction of wind or the sun isn't shining quite as much as it usually does, I say that with some irony in the UK, then of course the generating capacity falls even further. So it's just more indication that the policy that's being implemented, it doesn't gel with what the requirement is, and therefore you've got to question what the government foresees that the requirement will be in the next 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, I'll just say, Mike, the policy does gel. If the policy is breakdown, is chaos and breakdown, it seems to work quite nicely. And it is strange, we see breakdown in the NHS, the education system, the armed forces, and now we're on to power, but it must be a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. Well, speaking of economic issues, then we've got this from Global Capital. Lagarde is right, it's too early to talk about ending PEP. So what is PEP? This is the EU's Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme. This is QE on steroids. It's, I think, 1.85 trillion euros of quantitative easing under the term Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme. They describe it as a non-standard monetary policy measure initiated in March 2020 to counter the serious risk to monetary policy transmission mechanism and the outlook for the euro area posed by the coronavirus outbreak. So that should be absolutely clear. Anyway, the question is, how long will this quantitative easing program, this additional quantitative easing program, continue? And the expectation is it will continue to well past March next year. But Christine Lagarde, of course, who's the president of the European Central Bank, was attempting to what is described as institutionalize the PEP by turning it into a structured vehicle, a structured financial instrument. But apparently she has lost the vote on the board of the European Central Bank on that. Well, she's still demanding that they need to progress with this and go ahead with it, but clearly there's beginning to be some pushback on it. And just another piece of economic news that came out just before we came on air, and that is that Sheffield Forge Masters is to be nationalised, Brian, in order to this. You should be very pleased with this, in order to guarantee supply of steel for the Ministry of Defence and particularly the submarine program. So do you think that nationalising this company is going to guarantee supply of steel?
Well, I don't, because in line with my previous comment, everywhere we watch is breakdown and destruction of Britain's steel industry, and allowing it to be sold off into foreign hands has been a key part of policy across Labour and the Conservatives. So this has got to be deliberate breakdown of the country. But they've now got to the point that they know if they allow Sheffield Forge Masters to go, they're going to end up with major problems, because this is specific quality steel that's needed for specific defence purposes. But the name Nick Clegg comes into my mind because, of course, when Sheffield Forge Masters started to have problems several years ago, where was Mr. Clegg? Well, of course, he was nowhere to be seen. I don't know whether Alex would like to just give us a...
Well, just
I know.
before I bring Alex on, I'll just say that the Ministry of Defence has paid £2.6 million for the entire share capital of Sheffield Forgemasters. And
2.6 million. They can manage 2.6 million to secure defence, but you can find 1.6 billion for propaganda about COVID.
yes, and 30 billion for a test and trace program.
Yeah,
So
wow.
anyway, yes, but they're going to, don't worry, because they're going to, Alex, they're going to invest £400 million in the company. So that should see it all right.
Well, this is state corporatism, isn't it, Mike? Except it's supranational level, even an intercontinental level, with the amount of North American and European joint ventures in defence industries and the supply chain for defence industries now. For overseas viewers and those who've joined us more recently, you might not be aware that the reason why Nick Clegg, Britain's former Deputy Prime Minister when there was a Conservative Lib Dem coalition a decade ago, was just mentioned by Brian, is that Mr Clegg was one of the members of Parliament Sheffield. He had one of the Shield constituencies. Sheffield, of course, is you'd be world renowned as Britain's steel maker. So that's why he was apparently loath to commit. It's rather reminiscent, as was your recent energy segment, reminiscent of Nick Clegg's fellow EU massive enthusiast Etienne David. Belgium was Belgium's European Union commissioner quite a long time. He had the portfolio, and at the time was quite explicit that Britain and Belgium, with Europe's two large industrial producers in many ways, were going to be deindustrialized as part of his Europe portfolio.
Yes. Okay. Unfortunately, we had quite a bit of breakup in that, Alex, but I think we got most of what you were saying. Now, let's move on to online harms. The online safety bill, of course, is being drafted. The draft has been published, but there's a bit more work to be done before it gets laid before Parliament. And the latest person to be announced as getting involved in that work is Tory party representative Suzanne Webb, who is honoured to be picked to take a first look at this very important new piece of proposed legislation. That's her words, not mine. So Conservative MP Suzanne Webb will work cross-party on the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, looking at the draft online safety bill ahead of it being presented to MPs in the autumn, so after the summer holiday. Well, I thought it would be worthwhile just reminding ourselves what the implications of this bill are. Now, she said, as you see on screen, that she's honoured. She said it's a wide-ranging piece of legislation and truly groundbreaking because some of its proposals around harmful content and fines would be world firsts. There is no doubt the public supports greater protection for harmful online content, particularly for children. And this, of course, once again, is the excuse that's being used for the most draconian censorship legislation that we have seen. So let's just remind ourselves of what this is about. They say it applies to Category 1 platforms. Now, there are Category 1 platforms and Category 2 platforms, but this isn't clear who's going to be categorized in which of those. So there are concerns that this is going to have a chilling effect on competition in markets. But aside from that, it does, although the bill does distinguish between the so-called Category 1, which are large platforms like Twitter and Facebook and so on, and Category 2, which are smaller platforms, when they dole out the responsibilities that the bill claims to require, it doesn't include any criteria for how a platform would be categorized. So the bill provides that the Secretary of State will decide how the categories are defined and who falls into the various categories. So although we're saying Category 1 platforms applies to Facebook and Twitter and the likes, that's not necessarily going to be the case, and it's not defined in the bill. It applies to services used in the UK, so they're attempting to make this legislation apply to all kinds of companies that may not be even domiciled in the UK. Ofcom, as you know, is going to be the regulator, but there's huge room for scope creep in this bill. Just about every major clause has the opportunity for secondary legislation to be brought in after the fact. That's statutory instruments. These are laid before Parliament. They're often not debated. They're often not even looked at by MPs, and often laid at inappropriate times when to guarantee the fewest number of eyes on that legislation. It imposes this duty of care on various organisations, which is in line with the response to the online harms white paper. So any company in scope of the legislation will have a duty of care towards their users, so that what is unacceptable offline will also be unacceptable online. But the point that we've made in the past is that what's unacceptable offline is already unacceptable online, because there's already legislation in place to deal with certain types of illegal material. The largest, most popular social media sites will need to act on content that is lawful but still harmful. And this is the other point here, because the term harmful is not defined. This is a concept. Well, what do they say? What does it say in the bill? It says that, well, it's broad, it's vague. It says that it's content that could be reasonably, from the perspective of the provider, have a significant adverse physical or psychological impact on users. So it's totally subjective. There's no way of actually knowing what this is going to mean, and it remains undefined, as do many of the parts of the bill. Harmful also includes abuse that falls below the threshold of a criminal offence, encouragement of self-harm, and, here's the key, misinformation and disinformation. Again, these terms aren't defined, so that is basically whatever somebody decides it is. The draft bill contains reserved powers for Ofcom to pursue criminal action against named senior managers whose companies do not comply with requests for information for Ofcom. So this is not a corporate challenge by Ofcom. This would be against individuals. The bill will ensure people in the UK can express themselves freely online and participate in pluralistic and robust debate. Well, actually, that's not entirely true, because although the bill claims to maintain freedom of speech, so you'll be able to publish a website and create a website. You won't have any restriction on what you can say on your website. Of course, because the bill targets social media companies and search engines, actually there's no opportunity to participate in pluralistic and robust debate, because you will be deplatformed from the search engines and the social media platforms. We were already seeing that happen to a huge degree, including to the UK column. It's happening to many, many others. And we're hearing that other organizations are already beginning to be deplatformed from some of the payment platforms. So my understanding is that the Last American Vagabond has already been removed from PayPal, for example. So this is going to be the next step. Now, freedom of expression. People using platform services will need to have access to effective routes of appeal for content removed without good reason, and removed without good reason is the key phrase here, because of course the platforms already claim to have good reason to remove content, and they don't, although they have what might be judged as not effective routes of appeal at this point. They still do have routes of appeal, and at no point that I'm aware of have they ever come back and said, oh yeah, we made a mistake. So well, maybe on one or two very minor occasions, but in general, it becomes a big black hole. You put in your appeal and that's it. And then users will also be able to appeal to Ofcom, and these complaints will form an essential part of Ofcom's horizon scanning, research and enforcement activity. They will not actually do anything about it. It's just about intelligence gathering. But here's the key point. Ministers have added a new and specific duties to the bill for Category 1 services to protect content defined as democratically important. So any service which is considered to be Category 1 will be required to protect content that's considered democratically important. So that might be, for example, around elections, or anything really that the government...
To do with government policy.
Well, it could be government policy, it could be COVID-19 related, it could be any public health related thing. If that's considered democratically important, it gets protection from any censorship. Content on news publishers' website is not in scope. This includes both their own articles and user comments on those articles. Articles by recognized news publishers shared on in-scope services will be exempted, and Category 1 companies will now have a statutory duty to safeguard UK users' access to journalistic content shared on their platforms. So the BBC, the Guardian, the Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the other purveyors, including those of what many view to be the most prolific purveyors of fake news around, their content is going to be protected while everybody else's continues to be censored.
Well, let's use the word propaganda. The propaganda is going to be protected, and anybody who dares challenge the propaganda is now going to come under the scope of this bill.
Yes, and now we should say that the draft bill does make it clear that citizen journalist content will have the same protections as professional journalist content. But then again, the definition of citizen journalist is not clear. We know that if we look at Bellingcat as an example, these people consider themselves as citizen journalists, whereas in general, the likes of us or other people in alternative media are very much not considered citizen journalists. So who's going to have the same protections? I suspect it is for the likes of Bellingcat and not for anyone else.
No.
So, sorry.
I just wanted to remind our audience that it was a UK column, of course, that exposed that if we dug into Ofcom, we found a lot of people from the BBC drawing BBC pensions, but claiming that they were independent as part of their duties within Ofcom. Some of them were even married to BBC partners. So our analysis of Ofcom was actually that it was a minor offshoot of the BBC, and that it was crass nonsense to suggest that it could claim to be independent in any form at all. Ofcom declined to engage with us after we started to ask deeper questions about the pension packets that some of their board members were getting. But this presumably is something we need to dig into once again.
But I mean, I strongly suggest that everybody gets involved in resisting this piece of legislation, and also the police crime and courts bill. These two bills have to be dealt with, and everybody should be getting involved with that, really.
Yeah, because it's another step in the path to removing free speech.
Do we have time?
For the video, of course.
Oh, of course, right, okay. Well, you introduce it then.
Okay, well, a lot of people said to us, have you seen the video clip of Michael Gove talking? I hadn't, but I watched it pretty quickly after I was alerted to it, and we thought, yes, we must share this with our viewers for its rank arrogance.
No, we're going to do what's right for public health, and I think that COVID certification in certain limited venues and for certain limited events is a way of making people safer and giving more of us more freedom. Well, for people who can't be vaccinated, I think that certainly mandatory testing is a useful tool in our armory. But ultimately, if you can be vaccinated and you refuse to, that's a selfish act. You're putting other people's lives and health at risk. You should get vaccinated. Well, it depends obviously whether which part of the United Kingdom you're in or what the nature of the event is. But if you deliberately refuse to get vaccinated, and there are certain venues and certain events that require a certain level of safety, then the terms on which you will be able to get into those venues and those events, they'll be barred to you.
Well, there we are. You're getting more freedom, but just do it. Oh, beg your pardon. Just do as Michael Gove says, because the one thing you're not going to get is any informed choice. Just do as Michael Gove says. Luckily, we're not alone in criticising this particular man, Mike.
No, because Conservative Woman has published an open letter on this. And who are you calling selfish, Mr. Gove? I do recommend everybody goes and reads it on full. But I'll just read one paragraph from it. Yet you claim to be able to divine the motives of others, and lo, you tell us that they are all the same. And the motive you have detected is really quite a second-rate one, as though it is held by so many immature children instead of by thoughtful adults. Every inch you're equal. So I do recommend that everybody goes and reads that letter, and perhaps you might want to send it to him and ask him for comment.
Well, this is exactly what people should do. Don't be annoyed at sitting and listening to what this man says. Challenge him in every way possible. And as the school teacher demonstrated in dealing with the NHS Vax booking centre there, the more polite you are, the more measured with your factual evidence, the better you're going to get the result. I think we need to end there.
Yes. Now we're going to have a go at doing a short extra. We'll see how Alex's feed holds up. Alex, of course, not in his usual place at the moment, so that's why the internet connection between us isn't so good as usual. So I'll have a go at an extra and see how it goes. Otherwise, well, remember, we won't be back at 1 p.m. on Friday because of the Doctors for COVID Ethics Symposium that's being hosted on the UK Column website. If you want to watch it, ukcolumn.org/live, 5 to 10 p.m. tomorrow night and on Friday night.
Yeah, that's it from us. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back shortly. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.